If you're old enough to remember when phones had cords and the only thing that went viral was a cold, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Big 6-0 with Kaylee Harris and Guy Rawlinson. Because who better to discuss life's second act than two people who still think mature is a type of cheese?
And welcome to the Big 6-0 podcast. I'm Kaylee Harris and my friend Guy Rawlinson from primary school is with me. G'day, Guy.
Always a pleasure. You know that, Kaylee.
Each week we try and talk about things we remember when growing up, and we'd like to interview people about their life growing up as well. And recently I read a book that I thought was amazing. It's a really good yarn. Now, the book is called Going Under, and the author is Seana Smith. And she lives in Orange in central New South Wales, but she's born in Scotland, and she's just got an incredible story, and I thought it was really worth sharing. Seana, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's delightful to be here and meet you.
Great to have you with us as well. Now, you're from Scotland. You're born in Scotland. You've still got a lot of family over there, that's my understanding. And you moved out to Australia, and you've been living here for quite some time.
Yeah, a long time, since the 80s, although off and on at the beginning. But the last 25 years we've been here all the time.
Yeah, and then you did a bit of a tree change and moved out to Orange with your family. Tell us about your family. You've got twins?
So I've got twins who I had rather late in the day. I had them in my 40s. And I've got two big boys, as we call them, young men now, who are 27 and 25. So when they had left home and the twins were going to high school, and my husband, who's also Scottish, he wanted to stop working because he'd worked really hard in the oil and gas business and he'd worked in the Middle East a lot. And we just thought, well, it's a bit expensive in Sydney, so we'll move out to the bush. And not the bush, I mean, Orange isn't really the bush, but it's a delightful spot out there.
Yeah. And then, so you moved the family out there, and this is going back how many years?
So 6 years ago.
Okay. And you were just about to move out there, and then you got word that your mum back in Scotland wasn't well. Yeah. And then you flew back to be with the family.
Yeah.
Is this where the idea for the book Going Under came from?
Well, I think it was the right place to start because the book tells the story of the year which started with my mum dying and then us being in Orange and the big boys not living with us anymore and the twins going to high school, and really how I then fell apart, really. I think I'd had ups and downs with mental health in the past, but this was worse. And I think it was because my mum died and I really loved my mum. And I had always felt so sad and upset about not living close to her. But because of the family situation in Scotland, I just didn't feel that I would be able to survive if I stayed there for all the reasons we'll talk about. And she had dementia and I had been coming and going. I'd come and gone twice a year for about 3 years. But she was quite stable. And the last time I'd seen her, she'd been quite stable. And then suddenly she was having little strokes and she went downhill. And I was so lucky because on New Year's Day, I flew over to Scotland the start of that year to sit and hold her hand as she was dying. So she was unconscious when I got there. She'd had a big stroke, but she stayed alive for quite a few days, and me and my two sisters sat with her and talked to her, and nothing was left unsaid, but I was devastated.
Just if we can explore Going Under. It's a memoir. It goes into personal struggles, family secrets, all those sort of things. Take us back to your childhood. Was it a happy childhood?
Well,
siblings? Tell us a bit about that.
The thing is, and what I wanted to explore was that it was a very mixed childhood. So there were some terrible things that happened, but there were lots of good things too. And I'm not alone in this at all, I don't think. And I think you have to come to terms with it all as you get older, and especially as you're becoming an elder or being over 60, I think you owe it to yourself to try and get your head around the whole story. So my parents had us very young. My mum had 4 children by the time she was 28. She'd married Dad when she was 21, and their families had not been happy, or Mum's family was not happy about her marrying Dad. He had worked very hard, but he was a terrible alcoholic. Like, you just can't get round it. He was aggressive, he was violent at times, but he was also very charismatic and very adventurous, as people often are. So you just didn't know who was going to come through the door. You didn't know if it would be fun, or you didn't know whether it would be really quite scary. And in our house, Knives were out, and sometimes we had to leave when we were little. Sometimes Mum would take us away, or sometimes she would go away and would take her dinner down to her on a plate at the neighbours. But Mum stayed with Dad. But he was aggressive, especially when he drank whiskey. He was terrible. But our summer holidays were marvellous because Dad built a boat and we used to go sailing around the west coast of Scotland and the Hebridean Islands, all around Mull and Skye and Benbecula and Barra. They are the most beautiful places, even in the rain, but it's sunny too. And we would be sailing this boat up and down. We always had a good time on our holidays, but then the next thing you'd know, he'd just be appalling. So it was very confusing. I really got out as soon as I could. I left as soon as I could. But I kept going back. I was coming and going and coming and going. And when I left university, I came to Australia. Then I still came and went and came and went. I actually met my husband in Scotland. But I think one of the things that really appealed to me about him, apart from the fact that he was tall and handsome, was that he was getting a visa to go to Australia and I had a visa to go to Australia. So I really think that when I met him, I was still thinking, I've got to get out of this country because the family were still really dysfunctional there. And so we came to Australia with our oldest son and we've been permanently here since 1998.
Do you think your family was dysfunctional because of alcohol?
Yeah, 100% yes. Why was Dad drinking? I really don't know that, what might have happened to him. But I think that it's very genetic, and I think in his side of the family, nobody had ever been able to afford to drink as much as they wanted to. And he made a lot of money and he could afford to drink as much as he wanted to. And he was the boss, so nobody could fire him.
Yeah. And do you think you talk about in the book about the alcohol cupboard in your house being the centre of the house?
Yes, it was the centre of the house.
And even as a child, you knew how to pour your dad a drink.
That's right. And it was whiskey generally when he was young and you put water in it, but you never put ice and it wasn't very cold water. And we would carry the big crystal jug through and we would serve the drinks and he'd sit in his chair and say, get me a drink. And we would get him a drink. And we loved the attention. We just loved him giving us attention. And my mum used to drink Cinzano Bianco. But she was never a huge drinker at all, which was good for us, lucky for us kids, I think.
Growing up, and this would extend to kids growing up with parents who drink, were you intuitive to the mood changes, particularly with your father?
Yeah, absolutely. When the door closed, we would all just tense to see what was going to happen. And sometimes he would be full of joy. Sometimes he'd be drunk and very, very jolly, And often there were parties in the house or people round for a drink. It was really common for the neighbours to come in for a drink or us to go to the neighbours for a drink. It was never all terrible, It was often just later. Or if he'd been out to the pub and came in blind drunk or he had all these different stages and we knew what they were. And I think that for anybody who's listening who's been in that situation, they'll recognise that you become very sensitive both to what everybody's drinking and what the mood is in the room. And you adjust your behaviour to try and keep the peace at all times. And I certainly turned into a massive people pleaser, because I needed... I think when I look back, I think the house was never a really safe environment. So everywhere else had to be safe, which meant that I had to try to always keep everybody happy, which is absolutely exhausting.
Was your dad, did your dad behave differently on different types of alcohol, or did he just...
We think he did, because he did stop drinking whiskey at some point when I was a teenager. And he used to drink pink gin, which, not many men in Scotland drink pink gin, but he was very bloody-minded. Although towards the end of his life, he drank whiskey again. And he had dementia by the time alcohol-induced dementia, which was never properly diagnosed, but it's definitely what he had it. By the time he was 65, he couldn't walk properly, and the last 5 to 6 years of his life were pretty quiet. And I do say that he was improved with dementia because he was no trouble. But he just sat in a chair. And Mum stayed with him and she would make him shower and put clean clothes on him.
Australia is known for its drinking culture. Is Scotland the same?
It's worse. And honestly, it's worse. I really think that. And I think that's because of the cold and the weather, that people... I think it is worth. I've had the experience of bringing up 4 children here. It's very hard for them to drink before they're 18. Not impossible. But in Scotland, my friends' kids were drinking in pubs from quite a young age. And I think it's more ingrained. So to not drink is more of a unusual thing there. I mean, statistics say that a lot of people are teetotal in Scotland, but because I think there's a lot of people who've stopped drinking there because they had to, and maybe people who've never drunk at all because their families have. So I actually think it's worse. And I think the statistics would show that, people have done studies about it. The health is worse there and so on. The heart problems are worse there too. So, but it's a wonderful country, as is Australia. But both countries have got a massive problem with alcohol.
Did your upbringing, did that influence you in later life in any way, shape or form?
Well, I think it influenced me absolutely. I was always on the move. I worked in television, so for 10 years, you always have short contracts in television. Suited me fine because I never wanted to stay anywhere for too long. And I went from Australia back to the UK, back to Australia, back to the UK. I never wanted to get married. I always used to say, no. And I was horrible to boyfriends because I wanted the attention, but I didn't want a proper relationship. And I really only sorted myself out emotionally when I was 30. Because I had a really good counsellor, and I remember saying to her, I've got to change this, because I realised at that age that I would like to have a family and I would like to have children, but that the way I'd been going about my life was not going to get me there, or things were not going to work out fine. So I had a very significant year of therapy in Glasgow, which helped me a lot there. It also helped distance me from my parents a bit and see that they were just short Scottish people. They weren't these big figures that were huge in my mind. So yeah, I think it's had a lot of influence, and I think I've been quite sensitive to other people's emotions, which is good. But then being a people pleaser is extremely draining, and I think women are pretty bad at that anyway. And it's detrimental to your life.
This episode of the Big 6-0 brought to you by the PR Guy. Story to tell, brand to build. If your business has big ideas but a small budget, we've got you covered. The PR Guy, always true to our word. Visit theprguy.com.au for more details.
Let's talk about your drinking history. Now, when did you start drinking? And was your father a big influence on that?
Well, yeah, I think that I had never seen people have a laugh without alcohol or cry. It was just there all the time, loads of it. And I started drinking probably when I was about 15, 16, even in the pub. We were drinking, but not a huge amount, because I had run away and got myself a scholarship to boarding school. And I always think that kept me on the straight and narrow a bit until I was 18 when I left school. I immediately went to work in a pub then, and then I went to Italy. And after that, for all of my 20s, I was binge drinking, as were many people in Australia and in Scotland. So I was a good time girl. I saw myself as a party person. I wanted to be that really fun person that everybody liked. Now I don't. I don't mind if people don't like me now, but all that time I had that year of therapy in Glasgow, and she suggested I stop drinking. And when I met my husband, I had stopped drinking for quite a few months. And I vividly remember going to a wedding on a Friday and a wedding on a Saturday and not drinking. And actually nobody cared, and I had a great time. And I remember thinking, well, that's amazing. And when I had my children, I wasn't drinking very much because they were very wild children, and I just wised up to the fact that it wasn't worth having a hangover with a toddler. But what happened for me was, once the youngest children got to 5 or 6 and life got a bit easier, I started drinking more again. So I know some people drink when their kids are little. I think I did try to, but I just couldn't do it. But once they were in school, life got much easier. My husband always got up early, so when I could lie in a bit, I definitely started drinking more at home. And my husband went off to work in the Middle East for a month at a time, and I was drinking wine at home, but always trying not to drink too much. So I'd go through these phases where I'd think, okay, I'm not drinking during the week, not drinking during the week. And then I would during the week, and then I'd give myself a hard time. So I think I always had a battle in my brain about it because I loved the numbing effects of alcohol and I wanted to opt out of my life a lot, really. But I didn't like the hangovers and I didn't want to be like my dad. So I think I always was fighting myself, which is totally exhausting. But the year that I write about in the book was worse, I think, because Mum had died and I was so distraught and we'd moved and everything had changed. And then, so I've described a lot sort of waking up in the morning and thinking, can I have a drink today? What day is it? And going, oh, it's Monday, I can't drink till Friday. And just the torture that I put myself through with that. And then the cravings. So I might have a few good weeks and then the cravings would start and it'd get to 4 o'clock. And I'd be thinking, but I didn't often keep wine in the house because then I would have just drunk it. So occasionally, Paul and I would go to a vineyard, not very often, and if I ever bought a case of wine, then I would just drink a bottle a night until it was gone. But I know some people that I've talked to would be drinking 2 bottles of wine a night or 3 bottles of wine a night. And that wasn't me, but 1 bottle of wine a night. But after a few days of that, I'd get quite depressed as well. And I'd think, I wish I could just have one. I wish I could just have one. And my friends can just have, loads of people I know can just have one. They might have 2. But I also could spot the people that were going to have the whole bottle when they were out and were drinking really fast. So I do see myself as I don't talk about that I was an alcoholic, but my sisters would say that I was an alcoholic. But I would say I had a really big drink problem because my drinking was causing me loads of problems. One of the biggest problems was stopping myself drinking as much as I wanted to. And I knew that as you get older, people tend to drink more. And if they have got a problem, they tend to drink more. And I was really getting quite upset about it and didn't think I could stop. That was the thing. I just didn't think I could not see a life without alcohol. Couldn't imagine it.
You mentioned TV. Going from TV to writing, how did you transition from a successful TV career to becoming an author and a blogger? How did that unfold?
Well, it was really because I had all these children and I wasn't particularly organised. And then my oldest son was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. And my husband kept disappearing off for a couple of months at a time to New Guinea. And I just thought, there's no way I can get organised and go to work. I will never get this child to daycare. So I gave up all hope of ever working. But I knew that there was a great little book called Edinburgh for Under 5s, and I pitched that when Christian was a baby and I was pregnant with the second one. I pitched it to Pan Macmillan and they published it. So I started then a career of writing books. I got to know the publisher who I still work with. And then I turned that into a blog. And I really love websites. In lots of ways, they're better than books, or for factual things, they're better than books because you can update them all the time if you put the effort in. And I love being able to sit there and just write something and it would be up online quite quickly. And so I didn't have to spend, because I had all these different children going in different directions and my son was quite unpredictable. So I didn't know if I might have to go into school or take him home. So it was something that I could do that I could fit in around the kids and I could drop it if I had to. You know, just being brutally frank, my husband was earning enough to support the family. So I was in a very fortunate position because I could work, but I wasn't under massive pressure. So that was lucky for me, I think, because I don't think I could have coped with trying to have children and be an employee of anybody else. Yeah, I was very fortunate.
One of the things you talk about in the book that resonated with me is about those, and you touched on it before, those inner voices in you that want you to drink.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily want to. And it's not the alcohol so much as the feeling that, as you said, the feeling it gives you. And particularly, I think this is true for a lot of women.
Yeah.
Certainly for a lot of people in my circle, when our children were younger, in that first sort of 10 years, it was what mothers did to cope. And you almost say to yourself, God, I deserve this. Because, I've just worked so hard and I'm raising these kids. And then when you finally get the kids to bed, you fall over the line with a glass of wine.
That's right.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, the thing about wine is, which was my glass of choice, if I hadn't eaten my dinner, then one glass would really relax me. or numb me out. And I would often have a glass of wine when I was cooking dinner, sausages again, or another spaghetti bolognese or whatever it was. And I felt I deserved it was a treat. And the fact of the matter is, when you've got all those little kids around you doing homework, you can't go and meditate for half an hour. You can't take yourself, even if you've got a pool, you can't just go and swim. Whereas you can multitask. So you can have your glass of wine, it's numbing you out. I mean, it's pretty practical. But the problem with it is a depressant. And it also really affects your sleep, I know now. So that even say I had 2 glasses of wine, maybe 4 units of alcohol, you're never going to sleep. Nobody in the world will have a good night's sleep, even with that small amount of alcohol. So it's actually making you more depressed and making you not cope. But it's such a quick fix, that's the thing. And, it's difficult. Like a walk would do it. Sometimes I did, when the kids were little, I would put them in the pram and I'd go for a walk and it would feel good. And sometimes I'd go and jump in the pool with them and it did feel good. But there was always this, I deserve it. And it was hard to get over that. And when I did stop drinking, I think one of the reasons that I accidentally stopped forever, not meaning to, was that I started drinking all these, other drinks that are like the Fever Tree. I'm drinking a pink grapefruit soda. So they're pretty cans, nice drinks. And I started drinking those instead. And I'd say, this is my treat. This is my treat. And that really helped me sort of feel that I deserve a treat every day. Sometimes it would be chocolate, peanut butter, ice cream, all sorts of things. But I just think that it's a pretty intense period of your life, isn't it? When you're cooking and working and they're hanging off you. And then I didn't mean to have twins, I was trying for a third child and I ended up with 2. That sort of prolonged the whole situation. Yeah, in 2013, when the twins were about 6 and 7, 6 turning 7, I stopped drinking for a year because I knew I'd been drinking far too much and I'd been mean to my husband. So I stopped for a whole year and I should never have started again because I got over the hump. I was doing okay. I had other ways to calm myself down. But at the back of my mind, I thought, if I just do this for a year, then everything will be different and I'll be able to drink like my friends, many friends who wouldn't ever feel that the half bottle of wine in the fridge was calling their name and they had to go and just drink the whole lot of it. So most people don't have a problem with alcohol, but that was not my story. I did start drinking again, and then it wasn't long before I was craving it in the afternoons and stopping myself. I talk about white knuckling it, so I'd stop myself from drinking. I wouldn't go to the shops, but it was very stressful. What a mess. I mean, life, for me, I stopped 5 years ago, which is the end that I write about in the book. And it's been the best thing I've ever done. And lots of people have got this story, and it's very personal to them. But I've now met loads of women and men, but who've decided to stop drinking and just find that their life is better without it. Which, if you don't have any problem with alcohol, you'd never really understand, But if you do, and you do stop, then you know what you're talking about. It's just everything's simpler for me now.
So whether it's structured publishing or blogging, through Sober Journeys, what's been the most rewarding aspect of, say, connecting with readers online?
Yeah, I think through social media as well as through websites is the directness of it. You do have that with books a bit. I mean, I've had lovely feedback about this book because it's so personal and people can relate to it, whether it's, being brought up in an alcoholic home or it's the problems with alcohol themselves, that it's very immediate. But I think writing the book was much harder and it took me 3 years. I had to learn lots of techniques. It was much harder than writing very factual things. But with all of that, it's the immediacy of chatting to and forth with people. It's been really rewarding. You're always trying to touch somebody. When I was doing, say, I had a website called Hello Sydney Kids, which I've sold and it's changed a lot. But I was helping people by saying where you could get a coffee near this beach or what the playground was like. And that was like being at the school gate and chatting to people and saying, oh, there's a great place here, it's a great place here. Whereas writing the memoir was connecting with people on a much deeper level and trying to have a story that would be interesting. But inevitably, when you read a book like that, it's quite a commitment on the reader's part. And to stay with you, they've got to be connecting to your story. And they bring their own story to that, So it's more emotional. experience, which I've loved, I've got to say.
Seana, thank you. It's been such a delight to speak to you. The book is called Going Under. It's available where all good books are sold, and even the bad ones too. It spoke to me a lot of your journey with your children and the stresses of having young children, things like that. And I think that will resonate with a lot of other people as well. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us.
And thank you for having you, and keep up the good work with the podcast, because it is exactly the kind of thing that I love listening to. So thank you.
The views and opinions expressed on the Big 60 are personal and reflect those of the hosts and guests. They do not represent the views or positions of any affiliated organisations or companies. This podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for guidance on any personal matters.
Oh, and before we go, let's give credit where credit is due. Kaylee Harris and I came up with all the genius content for this week's episode. Our producer, Nick Abood, well, he keeps the lights on and makes sure we don't accidentally upload a cat video instead of a podcast. So thanks for keeping us on track, Nick. Nick.